Hey everyone, this is Mimi. Welcome to Lyme 360. I am going to have a good friend of mine, Susie Zinn, come on. She has had Lyme as well, and she is also a licensed psychiatrist, and she's going to talk about mental health and Lyme. And here she is. I'm going to let her in right now. Susie, I think she's coming on right now. Hey, how
Hi,
are you?
good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. How's everything on the East Coast?
We're good. We're good. You were well?
Yes, yes. So
Okay,
this is
good.
a great topic that you're talking about today, which is so important, especially now. So
I
thank
know, I know, exactly. And so I wanted to talk about because you've had Lyme and you've been dealing a lot with the whole mental health issue, right? Just because of what we're going through with quarantine. But I really wanted to address about your experience with Lyme and how you've dealt with it. But I don't think many people talk about the mental health component with Lyme and how it's very isolating. Some of the symptoms are depression, right? And anxiety. So I think a lot of people don't address that. They feel alone because there's the um, financial burden to it. A lot of people don't believe them. It's painful. It's lonely, right? So if you don't have a sense of wanting to live or a purpose, it's hard. And I think it's not even talked about the suicide rate because of Lyme. So anyway, so I'd love to just hand it over to you and talk about your experience and how it relates to your work.
Yeah, sure. I think this is such an important topic. And I think just as we are growing with having more Lyme literate doctors, we also need to have more mental health clinicians that are more Lyme literate because the rates are so huge. We have 427,000 cases every year, which is more than HIV, more than cancer. And that's really what the CDC even expects to be underreported, because I think oftentimes exactly what you're saying is that these symptoms actually come off as psychiatric or mental health issues when people are experiencing hallucinations or OCD or extreme anxiety or depression or suicide thoughts or feelings. So they get misdiagnosed. So we don't really even know what the exact numbers are, but we do know that there's so many cases around the country of people that just end up struggling and suffering for so long because they aren't diagnosed with the correct with Lyme disease versus a mental health issue. So this is more and more, we just need to have more mental health clinicians that really understand, all right, what are some of the key issues that we should be looking for? What should they sort of go, you know what, maybe we should have you kind of check that out with your doctor versus just sort of thinking this is just general anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I
Um,
think some people don't realize that anxiety and depression is actually a symptom, right? So I feel like for some people who may have like they haven't been diagnosed yet, and then all of a sudden they have anxiety out of the blue or depression out of the blue, out of nowhere, and then they have other kind of symptoms that go along with it. That's when I kind of say to somebody, like, are you sure? Like, they're not, like, just go get tested because you never know that could be causing it and they don't even realize it.
I think you're so right. And the other issue too really is that people sort of describe the symptoms as being a little bit different. They'll say, well, I've had anxiety before, but this is different. There's something
Mm-hmm.
about it. I think that, symptoms like depersonalization is very common with tick-borne diseases. And again, as I said, like hallucinations or sort of feeling like things are not in reality, just because of the brain swelling or the organ swelling or the inflammation in the body that happens when you have a tick-borne disease. And depression is super common with tick-borne diseases. It definitely goes hand in hand. And the other factor really is just people passing as being well. That's the
Mm-hmm.
really hard part for them, because I think that they because they're chronically ill or they're ill for long periods of time and their symptoms are bizarre. Oftentimes people just really don't believe them, or they're like, oh, are you over getting sick, being sick still, can we kind
Mm-hmm.
of move on? So I think that that's really the isolation that you talk about, let alone the medical costs, or oftentimes too the medical fears that go along with people that have been poked or prodded or had ports or all different types of things, that afterwards just sort of the phobia of going to the doctors. All of these things are related when people have been
Hmm.
struggling with tick-borne diseases.
Right. You had mentioned in the beginning, depersonalization. It's interesting because I'd never heard that before until yesterday. And one of my friends called and said, my teenage 16-year-old daughter, we think she has Lyme. And I said, well, why do you think that? And she's like, she has this depersonalization in addition to, fatigue and all this other stuff. And I was like, so she was describing, I never had heard that. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, I think that people really feel like they're not in the now, right? That there's sort of the separation, that they sort of feel like they're disconnected, and also they're very disconnected from the people they care about. So they don't feel. I think the best way to describe it that Lyme patients have communicated to me is almost feeling like they have Asperger's. Their
Mm-hmm.
emotions are really numb. They feel disconnected from people. They don't feel close. They just sort of feel almost sort of in a dissociative state. They're
Mm-hmm.
very disconnected. And that is really, when you're talking about depression, when you talk about that, of just feeling this isolation of this disease that you're struggling with, and you can't connect with the people that you care about, which is really, really, really hard, especially for younger people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's true. So if someone were to come to you as a patient that's either been diagnosed with Lyme or has yet to be diagnosed, and they're, showing these symptoms, do you at this point medicate them, or do you try to just deal with the Lyme? Like, what's usually the best course of action if they do have either any of these symptoms as far as depression, anxiety, or?
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue for any mental health clinician is just, if we had someone that had an issue that seemed like maybe something with thyroid issues, we would refer them to a doctor for further testing. And I think when people have tick-borne diseases, there are certain symptoms that come up that just are so bizarre that they don't really seem like general issues. So people will describe feeling like their brain's on fire, or their brain's being squeezed, or the depersonalization, or have anxiety that doesn't really feel like anxiety, or the suicide thoughts came out of nowhere. Also, pandas for children, just OCD overnight that starts to occur. These would all be issues that a mental health clinician would really need to partner with a Lyme literate doctor in order to get them the support that they needed. And just getting tested, I think that's the best way to go. Rule
Mm-hmm.
things out, rule things in, because oftentimes this can destroy people's lives when they're misdiagnosed, especially when they're young people. They may be missing long periods of school, or with pandas in particular, just that chronic illness that just occurs for these young people, which is really debilitating for them.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you prescribe them medication though to go along with their Lyme treatment if they did exhibit these symptoms?
I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a
Yeah.
mental health clinician, but yes, I would always refer them to a psychiatrist as well, and work in a team effort. And because other issues that can come up too are eating issues, eating disorders. And so really kind of thinking from that team model of how is this best going to support someone
Mm-hmm.
with their journey of healing. And it's so important to kind of look at the full picture when you're dealing with someone who has been infected with a tick-borne disease. And you and I both know, because this is both of our stories, is that the co-infections are so common. So that's
Mm-hmm.
also the really hard part of it. Of I personally had Babesia as well as Rocky Mountain fever and Lyme. And I know you had Bartonella, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
I had like all of them. I had 5 different versions of it. So Bartonella, Babesia. Lyme wasn't even a big one for me. It was all the cofactors. And the cofactors are actually the ones that are worse, right? Those have the neurological symptoms and the pain. I always feel like if you just have Lyme, it's almost easier than having the cofactors that go with it. So those are the ones that have the worst symptoms, right?
Yes, yeah. And my story was very similar too, because I actually was diagnosed with Lyme, but they didn't do a panel for anything else. So my Lyme was treated pretty early on. It was misdiagnosed. They kind of said, well, it was the wrong season and you must have the flu, or, the usual kind of what happens with tick-borne diseases. But I think that the bigger issue was then kind of, 8 or 9 months later, then with the Babesia and Rocky Mountain fever really giving me a hard time. And I know that's a similar story for you too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that's often with so many people, that they really just are suffering in silence, and how much they're struggling. So yeah, speaking to a psychiatrist in order to support that when they're also having a Lyme literate doctor on their journey, whether they're doing herbs, whether they're doing ozone therapy, um, whether they're doing antibiotics, whatever choices that they're making with their doctor, that's actually really their journey is really important.
Right. And I do think you're bringing up different treatments. I think whichever path someone goes on, I think I don't judge anymore, because it's like I did things that I never thought I would be doing in my life. Like I was never one to even take Tylenol before this journey, and here I put a port in and was taking antibiotics 3 times a day. So it's like I don't judge, because no one knows a position that the person's in at that point and the desperation they're in. But I do think one thing that's in common, and it probably goes to the whole mental health component, is eating, right? It's just eating as clean as you can, because it helps mentally just not be bogged down and have a clear mind. But then it also helps the symptoms no matter what course of action you're going on. I think clean diet is key to any path that you're going on. Do you agree?
Agree, because what we really want to be doing is lowering inflammation, and that even goes to right now, right? So we want to be able to kind of reduce the stress that's in the body. And so when you have these infections, and particularly with co-infections, as many people experience that have Lyme or other tick-borne diseases, we want to kind of really lower that so the body can heal. And because oftentimes what can happen is, and there can be sort of organ issues. We're knowing that the common issues now with heart issues, with tick-borne diseases, or other parts of organs that people really struggle with. So we want to detoxify the body. So really eating is super clean. I know it's hard because it's also those little spirochetes that sort of live on sugar and carbohydrates and all those type of things is really, really hard. So it even makes it more challenging if people are struggling with eating issues to begin with, and then they get infections. Becomes really complicated. And that's why you really have to be thinking from a team effort and really seeking out a Lyme literate doctor, which you're lucky on the East Coast, there are so many more, but there are growing paths across the country. But we still are kind of really behind the curve in really understanding these diseases and issues, just because the symptoms are just so bizarre and so different with so many patients with co-occurrence of different illnesses.
It's also going back to the mental health component of it. I've talked to a lot of people who have Lyme, and it's funny it's not funny, but after I talk to them, you can tell almost like the ones that are going to get better and the ones that aren't, because the people who are kind of in this loop of like, why did this happen to me? Like depression loop of like why did this happen to me? I'm never going to get better. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's super important to get into a mindset to believe that this is just a journey that you're going to get over and get there, and just kind of, you got to almost believe that you're going to get well, right?
Yeah. And I like to kind of think of it, and patients that I've worked with or people that I've talked to, is this is a trauma that you've experienced in your body. And so can we kind of think about it? What's the post-traumatic growth? What was the learning from it? What did you have more gratitude and appreciation? It is hard. It is a long time journey that people go through when they have tick-borne diseases, but there are always going to be meaning making behind it. And I think that that's really where it's so important to be working with a mental health clinician in order to kind of make sure that you've got structure in your life and support, and there's people that you can talk to, because so many people were not believed that there was something wrong with them, right? They went to doctor, and people said, no, this is all in your head, and you need to go see a psychiatrist, and this is in your imagination, and there's nothing wrong with you. So that mental health component is just imperative for people in their healing journey. And I just really hope that more and more clinicians just learn more about it, because I think it really can help so many people get better, which is the whole point.
Because there's nothing worse than going to a doctor's office and having them say, I went to the emergency room 3 times in Santa Monica and 1 time here in Connecticut. And all 4 times at the end of it, they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. And they hand me a list of psychiatrists. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this lump on my chest didn't just grow because I wanted it to. Like, there's visible symptoms. And you're like, and you're telling me I'm making it up. It just makes you even more depressed when you think people think that you're making it up, or looking for attention, or a hypochondriac or something.
Yeah. And that was also my experience too. I had, breathless issues. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And so I thought I was having panic attacks all the time, plus the joint pain. and the brain fog, concentration issues. And when I went to the emergency room with a spiked fever and a red bullseye, by the way,
Oh
they
my
told me
gosh.
it's not actually Lyme season, and it wasn't, it was the winter, so it couldn't have been a tick-borne illness. And so they just sent me home and said, you have the flu or something like that, and you'll get better. So I went for about 8 or 9 months misdiagnosed and sort of kind of just kept getting worse and worse, and felt exactly your experience, that there was something in my head and I wasn't sure. I must have had, maybe some sort of illness that I couldn't get better, but I was just very, very much in my own head, just struggling and suffering until I actually met my doctor, and we kind of started working on that process, and what the sense of relief was for me when I actually started to get better and started to see the difference. But just like you, I followed protocol, really clean eating, lots of water, lots of sleep, low impact exercise. I did a lot of
Hmm.
trampoline and a lot of kind of, doing muscle building work just to start to feel better.
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly. So what, just to end it, is there any other advice or tips that you would give somebody right now who's in the middle of dealing with this and they are depressed or feel alone, or, um, they haven't found their kind of group to help support them?
Well, there are so many support networks now on Facebook, and finding Lyme literate doctors are so important. But, and I think beyond that too is just try to simplify your life. You're healing.
Hmm.
And it's so important just to have a community around you that believes you and is going to support you. But try not to do everything, because you are going to need to make sure that you get really good rest and that you're eating well. And this is really where your job is at this point. It's not trying to be a super parent or doing everything as you used to be able to. It's a time for healing, just like you would if you had any other illness. So I think it's about stopping, probably meditating more, being a little bit more quiet, and really, really upping your self-care, because it's hard work. And self-care in
Hmm.
general is hard work, let alone when you have a co-infection or you have Lyme disease. So that really is an important part of it, is just making sure that you're taking time for yourself, that you're getting the proper support. And if you don't have that, seek out a mental health clinician to really help you with that, to give you that structure that you need and someone to talk to. And really, you know, I think the most important thing for the communities to think about when people have tick-borne diseases is believe them. When they say that these symptoms are happening, believe them. Because
Hmm.
you have to be your best advocate, but that's the most isolating part about this. And when we have close to 500,000 people every year that are infected, let's believe them.
Hmm. Hmm. No, it's totally true. Um, because it is really lonely. But the one thing I would say is, like, in the past year when I've kind of really embraced the Lyme community on Instagram and kind of reached out and gotten to know people, like those have become some of my closest friends now. I talk to them all the time because we have a common bond. And even talking to people when I've done these IG lives with other people that afterwards are like, oh, I felt so badly. I'm like, so did I. Like, I felt awful during that 15 minutes live, even though we didn't look like either of us felt badly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and both of us like got out of bed to do it and then went back in bed, and no one knew that like we put on our game face for it. And then, just following up with them a couple of, like, are you still out of bed in bed? And yes, I am too. And I don't think people realize just because like we're on here with our hair done and our lipstick on, and doesn't mean that we're not in pain, or not fighting the battle as well. So I think people
Yeah.
need to realize that like it is an invisible disease, and just because someone's putting out a smile doesn't mean they're feeling great.
And I think that that's such a great point that you're saying to the invisible disease. And that's again just people passing in their lives because they don't look physically ill the way you would with cancer or other
Mm-hmm.
diseases, right? So people just assume, oh, why aren't you better yet? Or what's wrong with you? Or are you, do you like being sick? Or, all these kind of questions that come up for people. And meanwhile, people are just suffering in silence. And that is
Mm-hmm.
just the hardest part about it. So again, to your point, is really reaching out. It's amazing to see on Instagram the community really growing, or on Facebook. And that support alone can really change people. I've seen it be night and day of people that have really lost all hope, and then they find
Mm-hmm.
these communities, and then it changes everything, no matter what healing journey that they decide to go on, because there's a lot of different choices. But
Mm-hmm.
I really feel that that support is just so imperative for people to have someone else that can mirror up or understand their process.
Mm-hmm.
Is just incredible.
I don't know about you, but I have definitely over the like past 5 years of me fighting this is I've gotten really angry because I feel like I have missed out on a lot of my children's things where I've been in bed and have had to hire a sitter to take care of my baby and take her to the park and do all the things because I was not physically able to do that. So it just kind of feel like I've been robbed years of my family, and then I feel badly that I can't do what I thought I was do like I could do, for birthday parties or holidays or like I just let a lot of things drop by the wayside or don't do them the way I used to do them, and then I get kind of angry about that. So I'm sure you've had that experience, or I'm sure other
Yeah.
people
When
have.
I was infected, my kids were really little. They were 1 and 3. And it was hard because I just kind of had to pull it together and I just was suffering in silence and but again, it's just when mom can't be as much fun running around or mom doesn't feel as good, it's really hard. But I think that you have to give yourself grace with that and really allow yourself to heal and not feel guilty. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
cause it. And it's there's so many people that are in the same situation. And I think that's really where the community is so important for you to reach out. And people have so many of the same shared stories. They feel that they were robbed of time with their family or close ones or their lives, people losing their
Mm-hmm.
jobs or not being able to work or spending, significant amount of time in bed because of the fatigue is just so debilitating, is really what the challenge is with these tick-borne diseases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great. And I would encourage everybody to follow you also on Instagram because you always have daily little motivational quotes and insights that get you through the day, which is great. And I really enjoy them. But thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for everything you're doing to educate people in the Lyme community and really just keeping people connected, which again, as we're saying, is so important to their mental health to feel like they have that support